Chairman, for holding this very important hearing, and I also want to thank the survivors of the massacre who spoke on the first panel and shared their stories with us today. As the 100th year anniversary of the Tulsa-Greenwood Massacre approaches, we must examine this part of our history, lest we be bound to repeat it. The massacre of Black lives may have been the deadliest, but it certainly was not an isolated event. Black people in this country continue to fight against racist violence even today, and the legacy of racist violence. We cannot let our future be defined by hate any longer and by racism any longer. Later today, I will introduce the Tulsa-Greenwood Massacre Accountability Claims Act, which will create a federal cause of action for massacre-related claims. The victims of this atrocity have been denied justice for far too long. Similar legislation was previously introduced by my friend, former Congressman and former Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, John Conyers. I'm honored to continue his legacy in this way. Ms. Heath, why is congressional action so important to create accountability, and why is accountability so important after atrocities such as Greenwood?
Thank you. As you heard from Mr. Miller and Mr. Solomon Simmons, the courts have failed to deliver justice necessary and hear the merits of these atrocities, and therefore legislative remedy is incredibly important post any serious or gross human rights violation such as the Tulsa Race Massacre, or including acts of racial discrimination, which include housing, education, employment, racial discrimination in the U.S. today impacting Black people. It is incredibly important that repair mechanisms are proportional to the harms that were committed and not just symbolic. In the case of Greenwood, material damage was done, including moral damage, which should be compensated for. And under international law, there are various forms of reparation in addition to financial compensation, legal and institutional reforms also that need to be administered in the case of Greenwood. All forms of repair, given the damage that was done in Greenwood, need to be on the table in order to provide full restitution to the gravity of the harms and crimes committed.
Thank you. Attorney Solomon Simmons, would you care to respond to that question?
Well, again, because this body, this Congress has shown the ability throughout our history with the Japanese internment camp survivors, the 911 Commission, it's important for Congress, the United States of America, to say, you know, what happened to these people were wrong. We have the power to remedy it, and we should remedy it. We must have accountability for what happened in Greenwood. Because if we don't have accountability for what happened in Greenwood, it will only happen again. It's not enough just to know something happened so you won't repeat it. You have to know its consequences that it happened. So far, has been any consequences from anyone at this point, and we're hope and pray that we can get some consequences from Congress.
Thank you. Ms. Heath, are you aware, and Professor Miller, are you all aware of any instances in this country where Black people have received reparation for harm done to them?
Yes, in 1923, the Rosewood Race Massacre occurred 2 years after the Tulsa Race Massacre. Victims in the 1990s were compensated, including their descendants, with scholarships. In addition, North Carolina compensated victims of forced sterilization for a discriminatory eugenics law. So reparations have been paid, but not to descendants of enslaved Africans at the grander level, and also in this case of Tulsa and many other incidents of racial violence.
If we think broadly about reparations, the federal government has actually already made it possible for African Americans, for example, Black farmers, to sue to gain some compensation. So Congress has taken a lead on this before. And
You
can
might
take a
need to
lead in
turn
it
your
again.
microphone on, Professor. Was it already on?
Oh, sorry, thought it was on. Did you not hear me?
All right.
So Congress has taken a lead on this before, for example, with the black farmers legislation, and I'm glad that Congress is taking a lead on it again.
Thank you. So H.R. 40 or the Tulsa-Greenwood Massacre Accountability Claims Act would not be new. It would not be unique. It would not be a trailblazer. It would just be a continuation of justice that has been afforded to certain victims of racism in this country throughout our history. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it's worth recognizing that states themselves, California has been a leader in affording this sort of relief to, for example, victims of Armenian genocide, braceros, Holocaust survivors, and so it's long overdue for African Americans as well.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Garcia from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for bringing this